If there's one thing that the Reverend Wilbur Awdry's Railway series books, and by extension, Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, can be praised for, is its commitment to railway realism. Awdry was an avid railway enthusiast and believed his story should be as realistic as possible. He based many of his stories on real-life events, some of which include runaway trains. Runaway trains are obviously serious dangers given you have hundreds of thousands of pounds of steel on wheels racing at an uncontrollable speed, potentially through densely populated areas. Thomas and Friends, despite its cheery attitude for the most part, handles runaway trains in a serious manner and captures the true danger that can be involved with them. The first case is Thomas and the Trucks. As Thomas reaches the top of Gordon's Hill, Thomas's previously triumphant theme begins to lower in tone, until devolving into a more panicked theme as the troublesome trucks push him down the hill.
Stop pushing, he hissed, but the cars took no notice. Go on, they giggled in their silly way.
It's a case of coupler slack and buff action. As the train crests the hill, the cars begin pushing against each other. If a driver isn't careful, they can easily lose control of their train going downhill. You have to consider as well that these trains are sentient and can feel pain. If Thomas derails, he's in for a world of hurt and potentially his crew too. No wonder why he'd be so frightened. Considering the Railway series and Thomas and Friends' more realistic approach, the characters act like locomotives. They take time to speed up and stop. They can't simply just stop and avoid a crash at will. As Thomas approaches Marin Station and the danger theme begins to wind down at the deciding moment if Thomas will stay on the rails or not, he does, and the camera angles and sound effects showcase the coupler buff action as he stops, given there is some weight to Thomas's train. It's not as dramatic as later examples, but it's a classic example and good introduction to an out-of-control train speeding downhill.
What are you doing here, Thomas? He asked.
Another good example is Old Iron. After some kids were messing around with James's controls and sent him down the line, James realizes he's going faster and faster and doesn't feel himself slowing down. The Runaway theme kicks in, increasing in intensity as James quickly learns the severity of the situation he's in.
He realized that he had no driver.
The theme, perfectly timed, collapses into a panicked frenzy as James realizes he has no driver or fireman, officially making him a runaway.
What shall I do? I can't stop! Help! Help!
To put it into perspective, imagine you were running really fast and couldn't control when you stopped or what your speed was or where you were going. That's basically the situation James is in right now. But going back to the Runaway theme, I'm no musician, so I'm sure there's some more creative stuff going on with the timing and then the way that it's all composed as done by show composers Mike O'Donnell and Junior Campbell. Earlier in the episode, a decent bit of time is spent with the human aspect of handling a runaway locomotive. I think this is a really nice touch to further emphasize that the engines can't control themselves and showcases the human side of railroading. While the engines are the main focus, the human side of railroading is just as important because they allow the trains to run at all. Anyway, the signal box scene shows quick thinking and planning is needed to prevent a potential casualty.
All traffic halted, he announced at last. Then he told the fireman what had happened. The signalman answered the telephone. Yes, he's here. Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope.
From the shoes of the human characters, this is a really bad situation. You have a runaway locomotive on the main line with absolutely no way of stopping itself. James could hit a car at a crossing, derail on a curve, smash into a siding, or hit another train. The only way to stop James is using Edward to chase him down, a nearly 60-year-old aging engine during the story setting. Back to the Runaway, the theme persists as Edward gives chase with dynamic and pacing camera shots, giving a sense of speed and urgency.
Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last he caught up with James.
The chase's scene is further intensified now that you have the inspector on the side of Edward. He could easily fall off and, well, get seriously injured or die. But luckily, as the rope is fastened around James's buffer and his fireman slows his engine down, the Runaway theme calms down, and there's a moment of silent calmness as James thanks and reconciles with Edward.
Across and took control. So the old iron caught you after all, chuckled Edward. I am sorry, whispered James. Thank you for saving me. You were splendid, Edward. That's all right, replied Edward.
As a side note, the Railway series illustrations are also able to exemplify the intensity of the chase scene. Long and thin steam trails indicating speed, and a panicked look on James's face. This episode is a shining example of how to handle a runaway train scenario. While the story is based on an exaggerated reprint of a story about a runaway locomotive incident in Alton, Illinois from 1947, the severity and urgency of the situation is left intact.
A fine piece of work, he said.
The Runaway, as the name implies, is another good example of how to handle a runaway train. There's some foreshadowing as it's stated Thomas's handbrake post-repair makes it seem as if his brakes are applied when they really aren't. One day, as he and his crew, who left Thomas's controls unattended, wait for Henry's connecting train, a musical ditty plays, once again foreshadowing incoming danger.
The fireman had forgotten all about Thomas's handbrake. Thomas simmered happily.
As a result of Thomas's brakes not being fully applied, he starts to run out of the station against his own will. The danger theme crescendos from a sharp synth sound, and like with Old Iron, collapses into the frantic runaway theme as the realization for Thomas, Annie, and Clarabelle kicks in.
He tried to whistle a warning, but he couldn't do that either. The conductor, driver, fireman, and passengers were all stranded on the platform. Stop! Stop! Shrieked Annie and Clarabelle. But Thomas, with plenty of steam, kept on going.
It's said Thomas has plenty of steam, so immediately we now know Thomas has no chance of stopping anytime soon until his steam pressure gradually diminishes. A runaway train on a slow-speed branch line like Thomas's can easily end in a derailment. Harold the helicopter with an engine inspector is sent to help, and by the time they reach Thomas, his steam pressure has dropped and he's slowed down enough for the inspector to jump into Thomas's cab and stop him. This is why I like the idea that the engines can't control themselves and actually act like steam locomotives. They tire out when their steam pressure drops, because without steam pressure, a steam locomotive is going to struggle to move its train, and if the engines could control themselves, there really wouldn't be a runaway situation like this either. The engine could just stop because they felt like it. Forcing these sentient locomotives to rely on human crews to control them adds a bit more of that personal human connection between human and machine. And of course, this means there's higher stakes and danger involved when a train runs loose or out of control. A close shave for Duck has some breakaway freight cars chasing Duck down Gordon's Hill on the main line. A synth note kickstarts the danger, and then the chase begins.
It was the conductor's warning whistle. Hurrah, 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 laughed the cars. We've broken away, we've broken away. Chase him, bump him, throw him off the rails.
The same principles of the runaway theme kicking in at the right time apply here too. Props to George Carlin and Ringo Starr for their narration here too. They really sell the danger of this scene.
Chase him, bump him, throw him off the rails, they yelled.
Hurry, Duck, hurry, said the driver. They raced through Edward Station, but the cars were catching up. As fast as we can, then they'll catch us gradually.
The Japanese dub, as narrated by Leo Morimoto, has some amazing voice acting for the characters too.
追っかけてダックを突き飛ばせ
貨車が叫ぶ
ダック早く
ダックは力を振り絞って貨車を止めようとした。
ダメだもう遅い
Side note, I highly recommend you watch the Japanese dub of Thomas the Tank Engine. There's some seriously good moments in it.
そこをどけ言ってないよ言ったよ言ってない言った
わっわっわー
Anyway, the scene is played out very frantically as the runaway freight train pushes Duck along. If the cars run into him too hard, they'll come off the rails along with Duck. Then there's this scene.
Oh, glory! Look at that! James was just pulling out on their line from the station ahead. Any minute, there could be a crash.
This is a life or death situation for whatever passengers are on James's train. Duck better hope he can slow down or stop in time, or else he's gonna run into the back of James's train and seriously injure or kill whoever's on board. James's slow departure is also made clear with heavy chuffing sounds.
James was just pulling out on their line from the station ahead.
The scene isn't exaggerated, it's grounded in reality. Something like this could and probably has happened. Duck even gives in and assumes the worst.
Against the cars. It's too late! Duck groaned.
Luckily, he's diverted into a siding and rather than killing someone, spooks a barber and his customer and gets a shaving cream beard instead. I would say that's a fair trade-off over a rear-end collision. While things could have gone far worse, Duck's runaway was played out realistically with railroad physics and weight in mind. There was some serious danger to be had here. There's a few other examples that handle runaway trains like a better few for Gordon, although its result is played up a bit more comedically.
Help me, please!
But other examples like Put Upon Percy explore the consequences of runaway freight cars left unattended, causing a coal mine to collapse. Props to the American and Japanese dub for some stellar voice work.
Get out of here fast! The mine's collapsing!
Percy! 大急ぎで逃げるんだ！
機関士が叫んだ。
The accident has some serious fallout as a rock slide buries Percy and his crew. Of course, they're saved in the end, but still. The set design and practical effects are really well done and definitely sell the danger. A big surprise for Percy has some more breakaway freight cars, stopped in thanks to a hill and railroad ties placed by railroad men. Another case of considering basic railroad physics, but it's still nice to see these incidents grounded in reality. I could go on about other runaway or out-of-control trains in episodes like Harvey to the Rescue, Thomas and the Jet Engine, The Runaway Elephant, and Percy's Big Mistake, but these aren't as dramatic as the previously mentioned ones. Plus some are a little, goofy? Little bit whack. What? There are some CGI examples too, but I just wanted to focus on the classic model series. Now I'm aware that kids watching these episodes probably aren't going to think about all the variables possible during a runaway train scenario like I did here. But upon rewatching some old episodes, I thought this topic would be something cool to mention given I'm not sure it's really been discussed too much if at all. On top of other accurate portrayals of railroad operations in the books and TV series, it's nice to see dangerous situations like runaway trains handled in a way that's realistic and doesn't play it down and make it all fuzzy just for kids. Just like the actual crashes, runaway trains are portrayed realistically with frantic music, dialogue, and expressions. These things can and have happened for real. It's important to teach kids interested in learning about trains of just some of the things that can happen in the real world. The Railway series and Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends have for the most part done this perfectly. I mean, it was one of the factors leading to my interest in trains today. But anyway, I haven't really made a commentary video analyzing Thomas the Tank Engine before, but I just wanted to give it a shot and share some of my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts about this runaway train topic are in the comments. What other things do you think Thomas and Friends does well in terms of realism? Whatever the case, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.
You're like ugly indeed. I'm green caterpillar with red stripes, continued Thomas firmly. You crawl like one too.
Fuck you!